From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. When this day began on Capitol Hill, Colonel Oliver North had been answering questions from politicians and their legal counsels for a total of 24 hours. Today, with politicians alone asking the questions for another 6 hours, Colonel North essentially listened. It has been a day on which senators and congressmen have chosen to give the colonel and the country a somewhat different view from his on what democracy and responsible government is all about. They were polite about it. ABC's Britt Hume is on the Hill.
Colonel North returned today to find an atmosphere utterly changed from that which first greeted him last week. No more angry committee lawyers seeking confessions of wrongdoing. Now it was the members' turn, and they can read the polls and read the mail.
I'm very pleased and honored to have you before this committee. I think you've done so much.
You projected yourself as a person that cares about this country, has deep love for this country. You've convinced me of that. You've clearly convinced the American people of that.
It's clear to me, and it's clear to the American people, that you're motivated by ideals, by love of country, and not the pursuit of profit.
I don't want you prosecuted. I don't. I don't think many people in America do.
And members had also learned that questioning this witness often just opened the floodgates to eloquent speeches. So members made some speeches today themselves, and some eloquent ones, too.
Now, you've addressed several pleas to this committee, very eloquently. You asked that Congress not cut off aid to the Contras for the love of God and for the love of country. I now address a plea to you. Of all the qualities which the American people find compelling about you, none is more impressive than your obvious, deep devotion to this country. Please remember that others share that devotion, and recognize that it is possible for an American to disagree with you on aid to the Contras and still love God and still love this country just as much as you do. Although he's regularly asked to do so, God does not take sides in American politics. And in America, disagreement with the policies of the government is not evidence of lack of patriotism. I want to repeat that. In America, disagreement with the policies of the government is not evidence of lack of patriotism.
Senate Vice Chairman Rudman agreed with North's assertion that Congress had flip-flopped on supporting the Contras, but portrayed the issue in a different light.
The American people have the constitutional right to be wrong. And what Ronald Reagan thinks, or what Oliver North thinks, or what I think, or what anybody else thinks, makes not a whit. If the American people say enough, there comes a point that the views of the American people have to be heard.
And a few members criticized North directly and sharply.
The loss of the documents that you shredded has altered our understanding of our nation's history, if not the course of history itself. And I would ask you, would you retrieve those documents from the shredder today, if you could?
Congressman Brooks, I have testified to the facts as to what I have done, to those who told me to do what I did, to those with whom I was involved throughout. I have answered every question about those facts that I possibly could in the last 5.5 days. I've now been told we're going to extend it further, and I don't think it's appropriate now, nor is it any point in this for me to answer hypothetical questions about things that can never be.
Republican Congressman Cheney of Wyoming complained that Senate Chairman Inouye, a Democrat, had misrepresented the contents of a North to Poindexter memo from last September. On a weekend talk show, Inouye said the memo indicated the president had been briefed on the use of Iran arms funds for a covert operation unrelated to the Contras.
Chairman, I've read that memo very carefully this morning, and I don't find any reference in there at all to the notion of generating profits from selling arms to Iran, nor do I find any reference to the use of those profits in the memo that allegedly went to the president. I would suggest the president could have read it from cover to cover and not have had any knowledge whatsoever of an alleged diversion.
Inouye ultimately acknowledged that Cheney was correct. And late today, Inouye said one of North's former bosses, ex-National Security Advisor Robert McFarlane, had asked to be recalled to answer some of North's testimony, and he will be probably sometime tomorrow. Committee sources say North disagrees with McFarland on some important points, including whether McFarland authorized some of North's actions. But these same sources cautioned that the differences do not mean necessarily that either man is lying, only that their memories differ. Peter?
Bert, the senators and congressmen were polite, as we said, but did they also give the impression of being tired with lengthy lectures on how to run the country's business?
Well, I think they feel, Peter, that they did badly last week, that it was a bad week for Congress and a bad week for this committee in particular. They all can read the polls and the weekend news reports that indicated that people thought that Oliver North was doing very well, that he was a victim indeed, and that the members of the committee were, in effect, harassing him.
Britt, thanks very much. Britt Hume on Capitol Hill, back at 9 o'clock tomorrow. Not long after the hearings ended today, we talked again briefly with Senator Mitchell on Capitol Hill. Senator, you and others have said today that the president has been deprived of the wisdom, the advice of Congress. Is the system really in trouble, or is this a one-shot affair?
Well, as Senator Cohen, who's the vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, pointed out, in every other instance of covert action, the law has been followed and the congressional leadership notified, many of them larger and more comprehensive than these actions, and there have not been leaks.
But aside from turning Colonel North into something of a national hero in the eyes of many people, do you really think that we've all learned something about the system?
Oh, indeed we have. We have learned, above all else, that in a democracy which prizes openness and truth, it is very difficult to devise a means to conduct covert actions which require secrecy and deception. It involves more than just that conflict of values. It involves a continuing conflict over the proper role of the executive and legislative branches in the formulation and the execution of foreign policy. A contest, a tension that has existed for 200 years and will exist into the future. What makes it particularly dangerous now is the advent of instantaneous communication, immediate travel, international terrorism. It's a very difficult and complex problem.
Senator, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
You could even add the polls. Our latest ABC News poll confirms that Colonel North has been a very persuasive witness. A majority of Americans we asked this weekend told us they approved of the way Colonel North handled the Iran-Contra affair. Last week, a 2-to-1 majority disapproved of his actions. A majority this weekend also said he was justified in shredding documents and falsifying information. And 92% say he has been defending himself well. Our poll also shows the public thinks that Colonel North is the victim in this affair rather, as you can see, than a hero or a villain. And 2/3 of those we asked still believe that President Reagan knew about the diversion of money to the Contras. Later in this broadcast, the president on the road again. Richard Threlkeld on the long, hot summer of 1967. And the lonely lighthouse. The light is on, but nobody's home.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, brought to you by Advil.